You know, I recently ran into a young athlete who had sprained her ankle, something awful, and was told to do the traditional approach: rest, ice, compression, elevation. And that took a long time for that ankle to heal. So let's do something non-conventional. Let's actually teach the foot and the ankle and the rest of the body how it should behave after an inversion sprain. Now, inversion sprain is when we roll our ankle like stepping in a gopher hole, and all the tissue and ligaments on the outside of that ankle get stretched really quick, and there could be some tearing. There's definitely some strain depending on the grade of the sprain that you've done. But what I have found, and many of my colleagues, is as soon as you start to reintroduce proper joint mechanics into the foot and ankle complex, amazing things can happen. So you might need to have a couple of socks nearby that you can fold up and place underneath different areas of the feet. In my case, I've got these little foam wedges, thanks to Anatomy in Motion, and we're going to place them underneath the foot. So let's say I've sprained my right ankle, something awful. It's swollen, it's bruising, and I've been told to stay off it. I'm going to do just the opposite. I'm going to try and load it better. I'm going to teach it to get away from the outside damaged tissue and roll to the inside. So I'm going to take one wedge and I'm going to put it just behind my heel and slightly to the outside. So the inclined plane is going to roll the heel inward, allowing for there to be less pressure on the outside of the heel. And then I'm going to stand on up and I'm going to gently just start loading onto that injured leg and then come back. I'm not putting all my weight, but I am going to put a significant amount onto it. Now, if that feels good, that's great. Now, we might need to use a couple more wedges underneath the other 2 points of contact below the surface of the foot. We already have the heel. The other 2 points would be the ball of the foot just before the big toe. So I'll put a little wedge there, and I might put another wedge under the ball of the foot by the pinky toe. Now, it doesn't mean that this is the proper solution or the sequencing of these wedges. You might have to explore, like maybe it feels better with one in versus all 3. Maybe if I put it under this one, it's going to feel better than the other, because our foot shapes are going to differ from one person to the other. So I'm just going to gently allow that knee to bend and travel in the direction of the big toe. So it's not going to go straight ahead, but just go inward a little bit. And if that feels pretty good, that's great. I might just put the other wedge in there and play around with that. And I'm going to do this for maybe a minute or 2, and then I'm just going to carefully just walk around and see how that feels. Now, if you do that regularly, especially right after the injury, chances are the swelling will be reduced, the function will maintain itself, and the allowed time to recover is going to be reduced significantly. At least that's what we found.